fact, while we're waiting, if any of you have any questions, we can cover some individual questions right now if you want.
For once, I don't think I have any.
What?
I'm sure there are lots that if a situation arises, I would have one.
My favorite is, I don't have any questions. And then as soon as this call's over, everyone has questions.
I'm sure that happens all the time, right?
It does happen quite a bit, which is kind of funny. Or we'll do a training here in the office, and somebody won't attend the training, and then they'll ask us a question about the training, and I'm like, we just talked about it for like 2 hours yesterday. What?
Oh my God, that's funny. Do you get people who don't really want to ask questions online?
Yeah, maybe that's it. It's one of those things where you have to say there's no dumb questions, and then I always follow it up. There's no dumb questions, but there's just dumb people. So just don't be dumb people. You can ask any questions you want. In fact, what I've found is when somebody has a question, somebody else has the same question. So
Yeah.
it's somebody's afraid to ask it and then move forward. But all right, let's go ahead and get started. I've got a couple things that I want to go over today. If I was going to theme today out, I would call it earnest money, because there's some things we need to make sure that we're remembering with earnest money, and then also things that if we don't do it the right way, we can run into a few problems. So I'm going to share with you my screen real quick about, let's see. So in our contract, we have this first part right here, this earnest money deposit. Okay. Pretty self-explanatory. On this reference date, so the day that you're writing the contract, buyer's name, offers to purchase property from the seller's name. I've seen in the seller's name, owner of record, something like that. It's just so much easier if you call up the other agent and find out who the seller is, so that we have the real seller's name there.
Can I ask a question right here with regards to that? Because I had a situation where an agent, every time that he'd write, even though he had the right names, I had given him the right names, he kept putting on a new, like, addendum or whatever, owner of record. And so I had to do a addendum to say owner of record is blah, blah, blah. So how can we help them not do that?
Well, if it's somebody in our company, you can let me know and I can go talk to them. If it's not, unfortunately, we don't control what other people put on there. We just have to do addendums to fix the problems there. So I would love to say there was an easy answer to tell somebody not to put it there. I don't understand the reasoning. I understand the reasoning when they put it in this part right here where it's the seller and they don't know who the seller is.
Right. But after they know who everybody is and they keep doing it, that's what kind of, I was just at a loss for words.
My guess is somebody told them at one point that just to cover your bases, make sure you put owner of record so it encompasses everybody. But the problem is it's very vague. I mean, I don't know who the owner of record is. How many signatures should I be seeing at the bottom of my contract? If I was a seller's agent on that or a buyer's agent on it, and I saw that written there, I wouldn't even know whether I have a valid contract. Because if a seller has, let's say there's 3 people that have title to the property and I have 2 signatures at the bottom, and I'm assuming that I have a full contract, but there's a third person who never signed it, and all it says is owner of record there, but the third person never signed it, and I get all the way through my deal, and then I think, oh, I've got to make sure I fix this, and I find out that there's a third person on the deal, and that third person doesn't want to sell it, we didn't have a valid contract. So I would if I see that, I want to get it fixed right away. And if it keeps going on there, as long as, I mean, I guess as long as they're actually putting the name of the owners, then, and if they're putting the name and owner of record, like, that doesn't, you don't need to fix that. I just want you to fix it if it says just owner of record.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. Okay, so then the property described below agrees to deliver no later than 4 calendar days after acceptance as defined in section 23. So acceptance is once everybody signed the contract and it's been communicated. So then we have 4 calendar days after. So let's say that I get the earnest money, or I get the contract signed today. Today's Friday. So I'm going to have Saturday 1, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday. I have to have it into the office before Tuesday. Then, if you continue after this, it says after acceptance of the recipe, the buyer and seller, and receipt of the earnest money by the brokerage shall have 4 calendar days in which to deposit the earnest money into the brokerage real estate trust account. So when it talks about the brokerage, if you're remembering the old contract, it specifically talks about the buyer's brokerage. This particular one just says the brokerage. So it can go into the seller's brokerage, it can go in the buyer's brokerage. If you're dealing with, if you're taking a listing and you're dealing with an agent in a company that does not have a trust account for their earnest money, so they refuse to take earnest money, and they're going to want to put it in a title company because they don't have that, you can keep it in our company. So you can reach out to that agent and say, go ahead and just bring it into the company and we can have it at the brokerage account. You don't need another addendum because it talks about earnest money in the brokerage account, and that can be ours or the other company. But if you do it in a title company, you do have to have another addendum that specifically gives authorization from the buyer and the seller that it's going to be in the title company. Okay, so let's go back to these dates really quick. So 4 days, we said Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday. Okay, it's got to be in by Tuesday. Once it's in by Tuesday, then I'll have Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, but we're not going to deposit on Saturday. So I have to have it in the company deposit by Friday. So once we get it, we're going to deposit it as long as we have a fully completed contract. So we know that it's under contract. If it's not completely accepted yet, then we're not going to deposit that money into the account, but it also doesn't trigger the 4 days either because you don't have an accepted offer. So we're coming into the time of year. There's only one time of year that I know of that could create a problem for depositing earnest money. Obviously, if you don't get it in the time frame you need, it's going to create a problem. But right around Thanksgiving is when we have 4 days off where the office is closed and not depositing earnest money. So if you get earnest money and you turn it in the day before Thanksgiving, realize that there could be a problem with that getting deposited. So take that into account when we get into November, that out of the whole year, that's the only one that we really could run into the problem of not getting it deposited once you give it to the brokerage. Any questions? Oh, and then let's say that you get the earnest money on day 1. That still, that triggers our 4 days for the company, but the 3 days that we didn't use are now gone. So you're not going to get 8 days to deposit the money. You're going to still have 4 days after you receive it. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense. So what is the problem this creates? So I had an agent in our company month ago, maybe it was 2 months ago now, but since September went by so fast, could have been July, but got the earnest money, never turned it into the office. It has been under contract for close to 30 days and never turned in the earnest money. What problem did I create for my client? Anybody know what problem I created? I hope we're not doing this.
I would assume it just wasn't deposited by the brokerage. within the timely manner.
Okay, so if something in a contract is not done in a timely manner, what does that create?
Oh, default,
Default, okay?
possible.
So in this particular case, we got a buyer's default, right? They did not put the earnest money in. And then this stuff applies for anybody who is in default. Section 16, if the buyer defaults, these are our remedies. If the seller defaults, these are our remedies. So the biggest challenge is we got to make sure that we're not creating a scenario where we're creating a default specifically from, the agent side. So if the money gets given to the agent and the agent doesn't turn it into the office, and then the seller loses, or the buyer loses their earnest money because the seller cancels based off the buyer not depositing their earnest money, we've got a problem. And that problem is going to come back on the real estate agent because the real estate agent received the money. Now, what happens if the real estate agent doesn't receive the money? Okay, so now I'm coming up on my 4 days and I said, hey, I haven't received this money yet. What do I do? Anybody know what we do?
There's a couple of options. You could
Okay.
have them do it through Earnest, and it's pretty much immediately. So if you still have on the 4th day, maybe they could hand it to you, the agent, and then another 4 days could potentially, like if the brokerage was closed.
Yeah,
You
so they could do Earnest to expedite the process. What if they don't? What if your client's not bringing it in? Like you called them multiple times and said, hey, we got a deadline. What do we do?
You have to call the listing agent.
Yeah, you got to call it. You got to notify the listing agent, and you got to extend either you can extend the deadline. So Marissa, you're right on that. Rep C extends the earnest money deadline. You can do an earnest. You can do an addendum to extend that date. It doesn't have to be 4 days. You can put in your contract. I had this question 2 weeks ago where they had earnest money coming in, but they wanted to use their paycheck for the earnest money, and that paycheck wasn't coming in until next week. And that was going to be way past our 4 days. And all we needed to do was do an addendum that said, we will deposit the earnest money on next Friday. And they were able to get their next paycheck. They were able to put that earnest money in there and they were just fine. So it's really keeping everybody informed. But as a real estate agent, we have 2 responsibilities. One, if we receive the money, it's one of our fiduciary duties to account for all the money and get it deposited into our trust account. That's on the real estate agent until it comes to the brokerage. If we're not receiving it, it's not on us. We're not in default as far as agents. We're not going to be in trouble for them not getting it, but it is our responsibility to notify the listing agent that we have not received the earnest money and what we're planning to do with that. So that's our responsibility in that aspect. So we want to make sure that we're not putting anybody in default because of earnest money. That situation where I said that they were 30 days without even depositing it, it was a $10,000 earnest money check. So if anything went wrong on that transaction, that buyer was going to lose their earnest money because they had never deposited their funds in time. Actually, they actually never deposited it. So that's one thing to keep in mind. So once you receive it, confirmation of receipt of earnest money. So if you look back up here at the top, it says after acceptance and receipt of the earnest money of the brokerage, we just want to make sure that we have proof that we've got that. If you do use Earnest, just drop the receipt that you get, the deposit receipt, put that in there. That counts as your confirmation of earnest money. And then you just fill this out based off of what you're getting. So a question I've had before on if you write on the top here in this area right here in the form of, okay, this section right here, if I write wire transfer on there, and then the earnest money, they can't get Earnest to work, and they can't get the wire transfer to work. And just so we all know, Earnest is not a wire transfer, it's the ACH transfer. So it's different than that. So I just write transfer on here. But if that happens, we still got to notify them, because we still are doing something contrary to what the contract says. So easiest way to do that is personal check / transfer would be the easiest way to do that. But you're going to check what they actually end up doing here. As a brokerage, we don't accept cash, and we don't accept earnest money on mobile homes. So if you're doing a mobile home, we will not deposit earnest money for mobile homes. And if somebody wants to bring in a briefcase full of cash, that's not going to be deposited either. So both of those are the things that we won't deposit. Everything else we will. One thing to keep in mind, let's say that your client decides to write a personal check. Okay, they write a personal check for their earnest money, and then they deposit it here in the brokerage. Once we've got it deposited, that personal check has got to sit in the account for 10 days before we can refund that back to them. Mainly because of some fraud that had gone on years ago, but just to protect us, because we want to make sure that it clears their funds from their bank. So that, just to give you an idea, this was many years ago. But what a buyer was doing was they were writing, $5,000 earnest money checks, then canceling so then they would deposit it, then they would cancel the contract, and then they'd ask for the deposit back. And what was happening is brokerages were giving a check back to them to refund their earnest money. And then 3 days later, they find out that that money was never there, it bounced, and we already wrote money gone, and then that money has disappeared. So that was what was happening, is that you get a personal check in, takes a few days for it to clear, and during that time we're rewriting a check, and they're taking the money and they're going, and we would be liable for that. So to combat that, we're not going to reissue the check for at least 10 days. Now, there is, Brianna told me there was one method we can use to get around that if your client needs it. If your client can show proof that their account, that it came out of their account. So if they send us their bank statement that says it's been taken out of their account, and we can prove that it's been removed, then we could issue them a check a little sooner. But we need evidence saying that that money is real money. Otherwise, it's got to wait for 10 days. So that's something to keep in mind if you go under contract with somebody, and then it decides, like during the due diligence period of 2 days, they're like, oh, no, I don't want to do that one. Just keep in mind that it could take more than just 24 hours to get them their money back. This right here is the deposit of earnest money with a title insurance. So this has been designed so that you get permission from both parties to deposit it in the title company. You can't just say, oh, I can't put my earnest money in there, I'm just going to put it in a title company. There's some benefits with putting in a title company, and then there's some disadvantages to it. The benefit is that the money's all at the title company, and nothing has to happen with the brokerage, and it stays over there. The problem is when you want it released, both buyer and seller have to agree that they're going to release it. Now, even though it says right here, no additional authorization is required. So we put it in there that no authorization is required, but that's up to the title company on whether or not they're going to follow that. And from what I understand is most title companies aren't going to take the risk to disperse their earnest money if the deals don't go through. So even though it says we don't have to have written authorization for the title company, that's not our decision, and this is our form, not a title company form. So we're trying to mitigate that problem and get it back to the client faster, but a title company ultimately has that responsibility. In fact, it's right here. Buyer and seller acknowledge that the division of real estate has no authority over a title company's release or disbursement of earnest money to funds. So basically, we're saying that here's permission, but we don't control them, so they make their own rules. And for their protection, they just don't release it. So that's a decision you guys need to make, whether or not you want to put it in a title company. But if you want it in a title company, you need to have this addendum in your contract in order for you to deposit in the title company. Let's say that there is a challenge with the contract and you want to release the earnest money back to your client. So if it's really clear cut, if you look at your contract and it's very evident that the money is going to a specific person. So we canceled before due diligence deadline. If it's really understandable like that, then we don't need this resolution of earnest money dispute, because we already know where it's going and we'll go ahead and deposit it there. Now, if there is a question, and the one that I find the question the most is in the cancellation, there's a section that says I'm canceling based on other. Okay, so if you're canceling based on due diligence, super easy to figure out if you canceled before due diligence deadline. If you said cancel before finance and appraisal deadline, it's super easy to figure out if you canceled before finance and appraisal deadline. But if you check the box other, and I find this with new construction the most, is, you know, somebody didn't perform and they want to get out of it and they check the other box. If it's vague on our part as a company on whether or not who's supposed to get the earnest money, if there is any dispute whatsoever and we don't have any idea, we don't have a clear-cut reason for the buyer to have it or a clear-cut reason for the seller to have it, we're going to require you to get this resolution of earnest money dispute. Because basically what it's saying is that both the buyer and the seller agree that the money is going to this specific person. So even if the contract says the money should go to, so I've seen this with buyers who've done non-refundable earnest money. Sometimes the seller's like, I'm not going to take the earnest money. We didn't spend much time on there. Legally, can they take the earnest money? Yes, but not every seller does that. So in this particular case, the contract says money goes to seller, but if we get a resolution of earnest money dispute and it says the money's going to the buyer, then we will go ahead and send it to the buyer. So if it's clear cut, we won't need this, but if it has any question whatsoever, get this one signed. And if you have a question as an agent on whether or not they should get their money back, if you can get this one signed, that covers everybody in the process, because everybody's agreeing this is where the money's going. They can separate it. They can put this amount of money goes to the seller, this amount of money goes to the buyer. All of that can be done in this document here. Any questions on that? Okay, one last thing on earnest money. Let's see. Oh, okay. So Brianna wanted me to mention this, that if the earnest money amount that you're receiving is more money than you are getting as a commission. So let's say that your commission is going to be $20,000 and the earnest money is $25,000, which means as a brokerage, we have more money in our account than, because typically what it does is, say we have $5,000 earnest money in our account and you make $10,000, the title company will send us $5,000, we'll combine it with the earnest money, and that's how you get paid. That's how we use it. So we don't have to transfer the earnest money to the title company. We'll use that earnest money as your commission, and then the title company will send us the remaining amount. That's how it normally works. But if it goes where I have more earnest money in the account and my commission is less than the earnest money, then we have an excess, which means the brokerage actually has to send money to the title company in order for you to get it closed. And we actually have to wire that. So there is going to be a wiring fee for that to happen. But you have to be aware of this going into your closing, because that money needs to be transferred to title for you to even close the deal. So if you come to us and you say, hey, I need that money so we can close. When are you closing? Oh, we closed this morning at 10 o'clock and it should fund here in the next hour. You got to realize we got to wire that to the title company before they can even close it. So that's the only challenge that you run into, is if your earnest money is higher than your commission, just know you have to make that transfer to the title company prior to closing. Okay. Any questions on anything to do with earnest money?
Jason?
Yeah.
I don't have a question, but I do have personal learning experience.
Oh, we love those.
We love these. It was several years ago, but and I have never done it since until this week. So don't hold that against me, because I'll explain that.
Okay.
Don't ever collect earnest money and entrust it to somebody else, including anybody that you think, even our brokerage or the lender or whoever that you may trust. Because if something happens, you're going to be liable. I was lucky I wasn't liable and I didn't necessarily get in trouble, except being called into my broker's office, which is trouble enough. So anyway, yeah, anyway, it's a longer story than that, but don't ever do that.
Yeah.
Second of all, I just want to clarify. I did it this week because my client that I got under contract, her lender is her dad. He was going into the office the same day I would have, had I not have gotten into an accident that I was homebound. So that was the only reason. It's the client's father. He's her lender. Very responsible, but you know, kind of felt like I had no choice, but because I needed to get it there within the 4 days. But anyway, yeah, don't put yourself liable. I think that check was only $1,000, but at that time, that would have been a lot,
Yeah.
So
Yeah, as soon as you take on the money from your client, it's part of your fiduciary duties to manage the monies properly. So if you break that, that's not an ethics violation, that's a licensing violation. Not taking care of the money. In fact, I think in the newsletter for the second quarter that came out, I think there was $1,000 fine for somebody who misplaced the money that was entrusted to them. So if you take that money, make sure you don't lose it. The story that I was telling you about, the 30 days late, the agent took it and completely spaced having it and just never turned it into the office. So they're going to be responsible for that. Luckily for them, the transaction went through and everything closed and they were able to get that earnest money deposited in there. But could you imagine if that buyer would have lost that earnest money and it would have been because of the agent? I can tell you that agent would have been coming up with a $10,000 check to satisfy that. So yes, Tracy, you're absolutely right. If you get any money, you got to make sure you're covering it.
Oh, let me just cover my butt one more time. The money never came to me this week. She gave it to her dad to take it into our office. So just
So
want you to know that.
Yeah, no, in that particular case, obviously you wouldn't be liable for where that money went, but you are responsible to make sure that the money gets to the brokerage within 4 days. But as far as liability for that money, whoever takes that money is liable. But the scenario where if they gave you the money, then you handed that money to the lender or you handed it to a fellow agent and said, hey, will you take this into the office today? You just need to be aware that if they lost that, that's still on you, not on them.
Absolutely. Learned my lesson for sure.
Yeah. So, all right. Any other questions? Okay. Well, have a great weekend. And if you do have questions, feel free to reach out anytime.
Thanks, Jason.
You're welcome.